Gang Territory, Chapter 5, Part 1, Brace's Bryce. My aunt left for her office at 7:45. "Do the breakfast dishes, weed the front flower beds before you leave for school, and don't forget to lock the back door." She slammed the self-locking front door behind her and left me alone to face the day. The immediate problem was how to get into school without being set upon by the slug and his cronies. I had already devised a plan over breakfast, now to put it into effect. I hurriedly washed up the dishes, then dashed into the shed at the bottom of the garden to fetch the hoe and a bucket. I rapidly pulled out the biggest weeds from the 2 front garden flower beds, chucked them into the bucket, hoed quickly around the flowers, tipped the weeds from the bucket onto the compost heap, stowed the hoe and the bucket, and went back into the house. 10 minutes, all in all. I spent a couple of minutes searching my aunt's bookcase for something interesting to read. I found nothing with stories or pictures, so I took a book with the title, Why Men Fight. I thought it might explain to me why we were at war. I then took the kitchen scissors, cut off about 30 inches from the ball of string in the pantry, and stuffed the string in my pocket. I replaced the scissors. The string was essential for my plan. I slipped out of the back door, locked it carefully behind me, and set off in the direction of the school. It was still very early. During the night, I had had an idea how I could avoid the slug. With a bit of luck, I could arrive before any of the others, and, I hoped, before the slug and his escort. I trotted briskly along Lyons Avenue and down Layers Lane, pleased that my ribs hurt much less this morning than the day before. At Ma Jennings' corner shop there was a boy just coming out. I recognized him as being in my class, but I didn't know his name. "Hello," I said. "I saw you in class yesterday. What's your name?" To my surprise, he drew back into the shop doorway, glancing left and right in a scared sort of way, before replying, "I'm Stan Bryce. I seed you too yesterday, but I didn't know you lived up there." "In Lyons Avenue," I replied. "Are you going to school?" "No, it's too early. I'm shopping for my ma. Got to go. See you in class." He took off like the wind up Peppermill Lane, away from the direction of the school, as though the hounds of hell were at his heels. I looked around, wondering what he could be so scared of. Seeing nothing more frightening than a large blue cat yawning in the shop window, I decided that he was just a bit touched, and continued on my way. I soon arrived at the bridge over the river. Although everyone referred to it as the bridge, it was in fact 2 bridges. The original stone and brick bridge had been carried away some years earlier by a flood. The former abutments now led up to a high, narrow, temporary footbridge, barely wide enough for 2 people abreast. Motor vehicles, of which there were very few, crossed the river by an equally temporary military bridge, a few feet to one side of the footbridge. It was just wide enough for 1 vehicle. If 2 vehicles happened to meet in the middle of the bridge, a very rare occurrence indeed, one of them had to back up to allow the other to cross. This metal triangulated structure was sometimes known as the Bailey Bridge. A notice at each end warned in large red letters, "Forbidden to foot passengers. All pedestrians must cross by the footbridge." I crossed the river with a clear conscience by the footbridge, turned left into Shipyard, went into the churchyard, turned right, and skirted the wall I had followed the previous evening. I went almost up to the little gate into the schoolyard, where I stopped and looked around for a comfortable spot to install myself with my book until the bell rang. I settled myself in the morning sun, my back against an almost illegible ancient gravestone. From here I could easily have tossed a full milk bottle over the roof of the school's coke shed into the service area. I could also see one of the faces of the school clock. It showed 8:38. That gave me about 20 minutes reading before the bell. I opened my book and began to read. A lot of the pages were uncut, and so I guessed my aunt had not yet read it. The noise from the schoolyard increased with the arrival of pupils. At intervals, I glanced at the school clock. At 3 minutes to 9, I shut my book and prepared myself for a dash into the yard. It seemed a long 3 minutes, but finally the bell rang. I went quickly through the gate into the schoolyard. I attempted to disguise by which route I had arrived by strolling nonchalantly on a zigzag track through the thickest groups of children. The bell stopped, the whistle blew once, and we all froze. It blew again, and we ran to form our 6 lines. I made it to my line without incident. My stratagem had worked. Several children, including the slug, looked at me in surprise, as though wondering where I had suddenly come from. I hoped they wouldn't find out, as I intended to use the same method again. The third whistle blew, and we began to file tidily through the porch into our respective schoolrooms. Huffy gave us permission to sit. We sat, and I placed my book on the desk in front of me. Huffy came over, glanced at it, and said, "Personal books must be placed on the shelf under the desk. They are not to be read in class." I was reaching for it to carry out her instruction when she gave a kind of start and bent down quickly to look at the cover. Then she stood up and stared at me with a very strange, wide-eyed expression on her face. It's the kind of expression I might have had if I had suddenly discovered a new and strange sort of insect I had never seen before. "You read Russell?" she exclaimed. "Where did you get this book?" She picked it up to examine it closely. I was surprised at her interest. "It's one of my aunt's. I've only just started it. There's no real story, and it's a bit hard to follow, but some of the ideas are quite interesting. The author says war is caused by private ownership of property. Do the Germans want to invade us to take away our property?" Huffy seemed a bit shaken. It took a moment for her to recover her poise. "Something like that," she said at last, and handed back the book. "Well, put it away now. I'm going to call the roll." She began to call the names, and I noticed that of Stanley Bryce. Molly took advantage of the roll call to nudge me. "What's the book?" she whispered. I reached surreptitiously under the desk and slid it, hidden at lap level, across to her. She glanced through the pages, made a little moo of disgust, whispered, "No pictures," and passed it back to me. Roll call ended. Huffy called for volunteers for milk monitor. I immediately put up my hand and looked around for golf ball, but he was staring doggedly into his lap. Winifred had her hand up. To my delight, she and I were selected. At 10:20, just like the day before, Huffy said, "Right, milk monitors, you can leave now. The number is 28. 28, repeated Winifred, and we left the room. As soon as we were outside and the door closed, Winifred whispered to me angrily, "Where were you hiding before school this morning? I had an urgent message for you, and you weren't around." "Sorry, Winifred," I murmured contritely as we went towards the service door. "I got into the yard just in time." "Huh," she replied grumpily. "Just like a boy. Can't you get up a bit earlier?" I didn't try to justify myself. It hardly ever works. I simply asked as we got into the service area, "What's the urgent message?" "I'll tell you after we've got the milk." "How many?" asked the duty teacher. 26, I said confidently. "No, it's 28, said Winifred. 26, I said, giving her a nudge and trying to catch her eye. "Miss Ufford said 28, insisted Winifred. "I'm sure of it." "Make up your minds," said the duty teacher irritably. "Is it 28 or 26? "I think we need 26, I said, "but I may be wrong. Could you give us 28? Then, if I'm wrong, nobody will miss out. If I'm right, we'll bring back 2 full ones. Will that be all right?" "All right," said the duty teacher, "but next time make sure you get the number right." "What are you playing at?" demanded Winifred as soon as we were out of earshot of the duty teacher. "You know perfectly well the number's 28. It always is, unless somebody's away." "But I don't like milk. Neither does Golf Ball." Winifred looked at me sternly over her charged crate of milk bottles. "I see," she said evenly. "Well, I don't like cheats, and I don't like liars." She dumped her crate down on the table with a crash and tossed her head. "You and Golf Ball will drink your milk today, whether you like it or not." I began to realize what Bill Bates and the street gang were up against in Winifred. I decided to capitulate. I didn't want to lose her friendship, particularly since we had to have dinner together every day. "Okay, Winifred, you win. I'll drink my milk," I said soothingly. "Now, what's this urgent message you've got?" Winifred smiled at me. She wanted to be friends too. "You can call me Winnie if you like. Only my very best friends are allowed to call me Winnie." "Thank you, Winnie. I really like that. Now, what's this urgent message about?" Just then the bell rang, and we became very busy handing out the milk. Golf Ball made a sour face as Winifred handed him his bottle. He looked at me quizzically. I shrugged my shoulders in a hopeless gesture. "I did try," I said. Retaining his cooperation could be important. After the rush, I returned to the question of the urgent message. "So, Winnie, what's so urgent?" "It's just that at the dinner break I've got to go on an errand for my mother. I can't have dinner with you today. I've got to go in the other direction. My mum's expecting you, though, so don't be late like yesterday." This was serious news. I'd been counting on Winnie's company to get through the gauntlet of the street gang's sentries. This needed thinking about, and the morning break was nearly over. There was also another urgent matter to take care of. "Winnie, I've got to go to the boys' privy a moment," I said apologetically. "I'll be right back." The most pressing part of the matter dealt with, I took the piece of string out of my pocket and carefully measured the height of the wall. It was 2 full string lengths and a bit. I tied a knot in the string to indicate the length of the bit and stuffed it back in my pocket. I returned to Winifred as fast as I could and arrived a little before the end of the break. The bell sounded, and the children started handing back their empty bottles. When they had all filed into the classroom, there was 1 full bottle left over. Mine. I reached for it in order to open the cap, to poke in the straw. But Winnie took it from my hand. "Neither of us had the number right," she pronounced to my astonishment. "The right number was 27. I looked swiftly up and down the corridor, then leaned over to kiss her. "You're a real friend, Winnie," I said warmly. Back in class, I began to muse over the problem of how to get to Mrs. King's house without being caught in the street gang shenanigans. Behind her house were the allotments. Was there a way through there? But the allotments were private. Even so, Winnie had said that they had mostly been turned over to growing potatoes. Was there a way round to the other side of the allotments, and if so, was there a way in? I was interrupted in my musings by the shadow of Huffy falling across my face. She had come silently up to my desk and now stood between me and the light, looking down at me. "Are we all allowed to share your profound thoughts, or are your musings strictly private?" she asked sarcastically. I came crashing rudely back to the here and now. "Oh, sorry, Miss Ufford," I stammered. "What was the question?" The class broke into delighted laughter. I hated sarcasm, and I hated being laughed at when I didn't know the cause. "You were dreaming again, young man. In my class, I want the pupils to be present, not somewhere over the moon. If you're not going to pay attention, I may have to take measures that ensure that you do. Is my meaning clear?" I decided to try a gamble. If it didn't work out, I'd be no worse off. If it did, I'd have learned something useful. "Sorry, miss," I said with genuine contrition. "I really do want to pay attention. It's just that I have a problem, and I don't know how to solve it." "A problem?" queried Huffy. "Well, perhaps if you share your problem with us, we can solve it for you, and then you'll be free to attend to the lesson." "Oh, yes, please, miss," I said, with an enthusiasm that was not altogether pretended. "You see, I'm new here, and I don't yet know my way around. I've got an errand to run for my aunt. I've got to go to the top end of the street, and she said there was a short cut between the street and the river. But since I'd never been there, I don't know how to find the short cut." Nearly all the hands in the class shot up, including Molly's. "Right, Molly," said Huffy. "Tell us about this short cut." "It's Watermill Lane, miss," said Molly brightly. "It starts just across the road from the school gate. Instead of crossing the bridge, you turn left, go past the wool shop and then the mill. From there it can be rather muddy in the winter, but it'll be dry today. It goes up past the allotments on the left, and comes out nearly opposite Mr. Hibbard's general store." "Thank you, Molly. That was a very clear description," said Huffy. She obviously also knew Watermill Lane. "Does that resolve your problem?" asked Huffy, looking down at me over her spectacles. "Oh, yes, miss. Thank you, miss. My problem is completely resolved." And it was, or so I thought. "Then please pay attention from now on. Now, where was I?